Welcome listeners to another episode of our podcast, where we delve into the rich tapestry of faith and exploration. Today, our journey takes us along the sacred path of pilgrimage. This year's theme for Catholic Education Week was Pilgrims of Faith, which has inspired us to explore one of the world's most iconic and spiritually significant journeys, the Camino de Santiago, also known as the Way of St. James. Steeped in history dating back a millennium to the discovery of St. James's relics in the north of Spain, the Camino has drawn Christians from every corner of the globe in pilgrimage. So joining us today is a very special guest, Stephen Jordan, an esteemed RE and English teacher at St. Luke's High School, Barrhead. Stephen has embarked on the Camino multiple times alongside fellow pilgrims from the Paisley Diocese, so together we'll unravel the profound connection that the people of the Paisley Diocese share with the Camino, as well as exploring the modern day relevance of pilgrimages in 2023. And finally, we'll discuss what it's like to spend a day on the Camino de Santiago, both as experienced Camino walkers. So without further ado, over to Stephen. So, hi Stephen, welcome to our podcast. Thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Catherine.
So, getting on to our questions. My first question is, what would be a connection that the people of the Paisley Diocese would have to the Camino de Santiago?
Well, the obvious thing is that we're not that far from St. James's Interchange, which I didn't always know this, but I learned it a few years back that that's called St. James's Interchange because it's a place of departure on pilgrimage. You can walk all the way down through the UK and take a boat to join the English Camino, which I imagine people in the Middle Ages would have done.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that not that long ago we were talking about Catholic education, and a lot of the young people came from the schools to the Abbey, which of course is ancient.
Yeah.
And they travelled from there. They walked down to they had a tour of the Abbey first, and then they walked down to St Mirren's, and we had a mass. And I remember Bishop John talking about how there used to be a sign on the monastery that was a picture for the pilgrims. And I can't remember what it said, but it was something like, say a Hail Mary, those who pass here for us.
Yeah.
So if you go into the Abbey nowadays and ask around, no one will know what you're talking about, but I'm sure. So there is this connection with people leaving from Paisley on pilgrimage to the Camino of Santiago.
Yeah, which I don't think a lot of people know about.
No.
Actually.
No, I don't think they do. It made so much sense when they talked about St. James. Paisley Diocese has various kinds of symbols, and if you see the picture of the icon of Our Lady of Paisley, which is only a few years old, the shape of her skirt is supposed to be like the shell that represents Santiago. I remember when we were doing diocesan youth work, our logo had a shell on it representing St. James, so he's one of our patrons.
So yeah, a lot of really great connections there that maybe a lot of people in our diocese wouldn't know about. So it's something that now people know. Hopefully they'll start to watch out for.
Yep.
Moving on, I want to talk about how pilgrims and pilgrimages are relevant to 2023. I think people have an idea of pilgrims being a thing of the past and not present. So how can we stay with the times? Why is it important to continue our pilgrimages?
Well, it's funny because it's more popular now than it has been for centuries to walk in the Camino de Santiago. And I think that's because there's a lot of secular organisations doing it as well. So you walk along it now, and like I got to a place called San Juan de Ortega, which is a beautiful place in the mountains just outside of Burgos, and you can tell like there's been so much history there of people walking through. The old priest who's no longer there, I think both he and another older priest from further down the Camino, they were kind of early instigators. In fact, it was their youth group who painted all the yellow lines, all the yellow arrows.
Amazing.
I know. I actually met when I was there. I met a woman. She was just captivated by it all, and I asked her if this was her first time. She said, "Oh no, I've done it lots of times. In fact, my husband was one of the ones who painted those arrows." And so, yeah, it's clear that in a lot of ways it's changed the nature of it. It's no longer filled with Catholics, but it's filled with humans. It's filled with people who are on a journey. And I actually think a pilgrimage is a fantastic metaphor. You know, the English teacher coming out. It's a great metaphor. No matter what you're doing in life, if you're going through life, if you're going through university or a course, you have ups and downs. You've got times when you can see clearly the path ahead of you, and other times when you are struggling. And I think that's a great metaphor for it, for life. But for me personally, I loved doing the Camino straight away. It appealed to me, and I loved doing it for two reasons. One is like social, and one's more spiritual. And when I say social, I don't mean just, it was a great laugh and we were with pals.
Yeah.
Although it was a chance to meet up with a good friend of mine from way back when we were at university together. But there's a sense in which you're following in footsteps of people who have gone before you. So for me, my dad walked the Camino over a couple of years after he retired. And in a very real sense, I was following what he had done. I remember his stories, and as I come over the Pyrenees Mountains into the chapel, it's one of the first places you come to, I was there for night prayer, and then they sing the Salve Regina, and suddenly I'm kind of taken back to these memories of prayers that my dad and mum taught me years earlier. And I think in a very real sense I'm following in his footsteps, and I know not everybody has that, but there's also centuries of other people who have done it before us. John Paul II, I think it might have been the very first World Youth Day, called all the young people to Santiago de Compostela, and he himself walked some of the Camino. And yeah,
Which is really incredible to think you're really following in the footsteps of saints.
yeah, very literally. I think for us, imagining St. James being there, it's one of these kind of Catholic stories that you think we're all told, but we're all kind of a wee bit. What, really?
Did he really?
Did he take the ferry? Well, anyway, he maybe did. I'm not, who am I to say? But John Paul II was definitely there.
He was there.
And he's one of our 20th century saints.
He's brought a lot of young people to it. Lots of people in the diocese are younger ones who've all walked the Camino.
Yeah. There's something really powerful about following the footsteps of people. There's a real social element to it. I also think there's a spiritual element, because I think one of the things that we see in our society just now is a great confusion. And I don't know if this is a relevant analogy, but I remember learning that if a contract is misleading, then the contract's not valid.
Okay.
But if the contract's even confusing, it's not valid. And see, if you look around our society, I mean, things are at best confusing. Something like the Camino is a chance to just clear through all that, cut across it.
That's very apparent when you're on the Camino. I've walked part of it myself, but it's very apparent that people you meet, for whatever reason, whatever walk of life, everyone's looking for that same thing.
Yeah.
Peace and quiet and...
Yeah, in some way to cut across the chaos of their life. Who was it said? I read somewhere that just mercy is entering into someone else's chaos, and I quite like that phrase, because that idea of everybody's got this experience of chaos, and actually it's a very spiritual thing. I've been studying some Bible things recently, and the very first chapter of the Bible talks about the chaos waters and God, the Spirit of God's hovering over it.
Yeah.
And saying, let there be light, and just kind of cutting through it all.
And that light was so good.
Yeah.
It really was. Okay, well that's great. Really, really interesting points that we touched on there. I think a lot of people haven't walked the Camino and they know what it is, but on a more real sense and a more fun sense, as someone who has walked the Camino so many times, tell us the day in the life. What can you expect? What's it like? Who are you meeting? What are you eating? Tell us from an expert.
Well, start early.
Yeah. It's still dark.
I know. Well, I mean, depends when you go. Like, I was there in August this year, and it's hot in the midday. It's hot from 1-2 o'clock on. It's very, very hot, and you expect it to cool down, and it doesn't. And so that's the first thing you do. You start as early as you can. I remember my first place I was staying this year. The woman asked me when I was starting, and I said 8 o'clock, and she kind of looked at me as if, are you sure? So they tend to start like 7. If you want a long lie,
forget it.
Yeah, it's no. You've got stops along the way. There's certain towns that usually a stage in the Camino is about between 24 and 29 kilometres or something.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I mean, you probably think about that and you think, oh, it's not too bad. But you've got a backpack, you're kind of up and down hill. Normally you can see on the map where the hills are, and off you go. So I would tend to aim for the first town I would stop at for breakfast, would be as far along the road as I could possibly make it.
Uh-huh.
So between 5 and 10 kilometres you would want to get. And the nice thing is you stop there and you might see some others that you saw the night before, or you've met a couple of stops back, and you might just catch up with them for a while, have a coffee with them, chat. And these might be people, like I've done it with friends, and that's really nice. You meet up with them, you catch up with your friends again. But I've also done it on my own, and that's also nice because you start to make friends and build relationships. I met an older couple this year who were from Australia, and they must walk thousands of kilometres in a year because they were telling me where they've been. So in a day you might meet lots of people. But I don't know what you think, but then the second half of the day kind of drags on and it's hard you start to feel tired.
We had a lot of singing on our trail because there was an Italian youth group who were walking it behind us.
Yeah.
And when it hit that kind of midday mark, they would be singing Ciao Bella, which actually was great. It was really, really uplifting. It's what I needed on my route.
You need something. I think when it gets tiring, you need something to keep you going. I had a particular podcast that I liked to listen to. It only lasted for about an hour, but I knew it would keep me going for a good chunk of time. But the people, like the groups like that, are amazing because you do meet a lot of them. We met a whole. It was amazing actually. We met a whole group of young people from Madrid, and I think they were some connected with Opus Dei. But one of our group started chatting to one of them, and he was like, "Oh, I've just finished studying in St Andrews," and so he had all this kind of Scottish chat. So it's just random chance encounters that are never really random and chance encounters,
Yeah, 100%.
There's a bit of inspiration there.
And talk about getting into the town at night and the pilgrim's menu. That's something people don't really know.
Yeah, do you know what? I tend to miss the pilgrim's menu. I don't know why, but I think when there's a few times when you get into the town, you're there. It's sort of, hopefully you're there by. It depends how you're walking. But I would tend to get there for 2:00, or if I was taking my time. Like there was one time we passed this beautiful waterfall, and so we spent some time there, and just it was 4:00 by the time we got to the town. And then along the way there, most of the people in the town, most of the kind of restaurants in the town offer a pilgrim's menu, which is like a little carafe of wine. And
yeah, so for those who don't know, the pilgrim's menu is when you arrive in the town, the people who live there throughout the year, that's their main business, is the pilgrims passing through. So they offer usually a 3-course meal and a bottle of wine for €10 maybe.
Yeah. It's
and
not
all
expensive.
The pilgrims gather round in kind of squares or plazas, and everyone sits together, and it's quite nice because a lot of people still have their walking things on. They've not even made it to the albergue at night where you sleep in the big dorm rooms, and that was for me the highlight.
No, I know what you mean. It was fantastic. It was lovely to see the people then that you sort of exchange glances. There's sort of a process that first you notice people, and then you'll maybe exchange glances because they've noticed you.
Yeah.
And then the third day you'll chat to them, and then by the fifth day you're best pals. Sort of thing.
That's a really nice part of it as well. Actually, you feel quite familiar with your group, and then even when you come into Santiago, you're looking around and you're hoping everyone's made it, and they're all it is what they hoped it would be.
Yeah, no, it is lovely.
And what's that final moment like when you come into Santiago?
Well, I am not convinced that I've experienced that yet fully, because I've done a 5-day pilgrimage from Vigo up to Santiago. Yeah. And that was lovely, but in my mind I'm still on.
You're still on the
Camino,
journey,
which to me is quite good because it does last time.
It does.
Having said that, Santiago's cathedral is spectacular. Yeah. And I think when you do walk up when you start walking through the archways and you start to come in, and then you come round the front into that main square, and it's jam-packed full of other pilgrims.
I think it has to be one of the most exciting things I've ever done in terms of walking through those streets, and you're catching glimpses of the cathedral from certain angles, and you're thinking, is that it? Is that it? You're getting closer and closer, and then you're just there, and there's hundreds of people, and everyone is out of breath. They've got their shoes off, drinking water.
They're trying to take pictures where they can include the whole massive cathedral and the person, which is not possible unless you're a really good photographer.
Oh no, but it is. That's quite an incredible moment. of the Camino, definitely.
And then the other thing that it's not a daily thing. Well, in fact, it is a daily thing because you've got your passport and you collect stamps.
Yeah, of
as you
course,
go.
your Compostela.
We didn't mention that. And so as you go, wherever you go, you'll ask them if they've got a stamp. So every place that you stay, every albergue has got a stamp. But there's also these random little churches. Some of them are like from the 9th century. I remember coming past one called St. Roch's and texting my sister-in-law to tell her I was at St. Roch's Church.
Perfect.
Because she plays for
St. Roch's music.
Yeah. Shout out to St.
Shout
Roch's.
out to St. Roch's.
And and it was from the 9th century.
It's
was ancient.
really incredible.
Now, they didn't have a stamp. It was a wee bit too old. But some of the more modern ones have these wee shrines or little places where you can get a wee stamp there. And so you end up with this kind of, it tells a story of your whole journey, all these different places that you've been, which I don't know who came up with that idea, but what a brilliant idea.
It's brilliant.
It is really, as I look back in mine and, it's a bit like your own passport when you've, before you hand it in after 10 years.
Yeah.
And you've got all these places that you've travelled. You can tell stories about them all.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been great to talk to you today and to just talk a bit more about the Camino de Santiago. Thank you very much for your time. Any last words you want to say to the people of the Paisley Diocese on the Camino?
Do it.
Do it, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful about taking steps in the Bible. Jesus that steps onto the water, the stormy water, and calms it, or the men on the road, or the disciples, because it doesn't say they're men, but the disciples on the road to Emmaus, when they start walking with Jesus. I just, the idea of just going for a walk and meeting the Lord is one of the things I look forward to most in my life.
I think that's a nice way to look at it. So I hope that everyone listening, this has been somewhat of an inspiration. So thank you again for coming in.
Thank you, Catherine.
Buen Camino.
Igualmente, buen camino.
Anyone who doesn't know, that is what you're going to be saying to everyone you pass now that you've been inspired to walk the Camino. So buen Camino, and thank you again.
Thanks, Catherine.